Well, Mike, thanks for jumping on with us, man. It's great to visit with you.
Yeah, happy to be on. Thanks for reaching out. Looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, my pleasure. So first of all, what is the American Sport Fishing Association, and what is y'all's function?
Yeah, so we're not necessarily a household name in the sport fishing community. We are the trade association that represents the recreational fishing industry. So most of our members are manufacturers of rods, reels, line lures, apparel, you name it, anything that you might buy in the act of fishing. We generally represent the folks that make that. So, Shimano, Daiwa, Rapala, you name it. Same on the retail side, wholesalers, again, pretty much anyone in the business of recreational fishing. So we have several functions, the biggest of which is our trade show, ICAST, world's largest fishing tackle trade show.
I've been. Yeah.
And then we also
is it still in Orlando?
It is for the foreseeable future. Been there the past several years. We had a little hitch there in 2020, but picked it back up ever since.
Yeah. Oh, everybody did.
Yeah.
But yeah, I went, gosh, it's probably been 7 or 8 years ago. It was quite the show.
Yeah. Yeah, we were in Orlando then, right? Because we did Vegas for a couple years.
Yeah, this is Orlando because my wife she was like, well, you're going to Florida? I was like, yeah. She was like, well, I'm going. I'm taking Henry. We only had one kid at the time. She was like, I'm taking Henry to Disney World. I was like, well,
yeah, that seems to be popular
so
thing. Although it's in July. Just Disney World in July, from what I hear, isn't in the best time to be standing outside waiting in line.
Yeah, but, especially with a 2-year-old.
Yeah.
Who won't remember a damn thing about it.
Yeah.
So, okay, what is the history of the organization? How long have you guys been around?
We're actually getting ready to celebrate our 90th year. So we've been around for a good while. Now we've had a few different iterations of our name. We've been ASA since I think the mid 90s. We were the American Fishing Tackle Manufacturers Association before then. But yeah, we've been around for a good long while.
Okay. And where are y'all based out of?
We're based in Alexandria, Virginia. I'm actually looking on the Potomac River, and if I go one office over, I can see the Capitol. So we look up the Potomac River towards DC.
Right on. And so I'm imagine that you certainly enjoy fishing, but you told me off there that you were in a tree stand the other day. So, and there's some wooden carved duck decoys behind you. So,
the duck decoys were, I think, the wrong gift we got, or award we got, that were supposed to go to Ducks Unlimited. But, we ended up getting it anyway. But yeah, no, I do fish. Grew up fishing. I'm, I guess, an adult onset hunter. I got into it a couple years ago, and actually, I probably shouldn't say this. I've gotten to where I enjoy hunting a little bit more than fishing, because I don't work on hunting issues. When I'm fishing, I can't get like the fisheries policy stuff out of my head. When I'm hunting, it's just me in the woods, without any of the baggage that comes with it.
I grew up fishing. My dad loves bass fishing, which is king in Texas. We have a great fishery on the coast too, but I got into hunting when I was about 20. So it's been 2 decades, but I still enjoy hunting more than fishing. But I grew up doing it. And I still enjoy it, but it's like, yeah, which kid do you love the most? I don't know. I kind of love hunting just a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, for me, there's also a novelty. Again, I've only been doing it for a couple of years. But I don't know. First deer I shot, the sensation of getting the vitals in the crosshairs, pulling the trigger. I'd never felt anything like that before. So it's a different level for sure.
If every fish I caught was like a 10-pound bass, maybe I would get that feeling, but that's only happened once. So
yeah, gotta lower the expectations, I guess.
So your position, you're the VP of Government Affairs. So I'm assuming you're just there. Your main job is to keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on as far as anti-fishing legislation that could affect our community. Yeah,
and a fair amount of pro-fishing legislation too. But so we've got a team here. I oversee, again, we're in DC, so oversee a lot of federal, national policy, but we've got staff all around the country that work on regional, state issues too. Part of the challenge with fishing, well, hunting too, there's not like a single law or policy that governs all of it. So you've got to keep track of, species by species, region by region. It ends up being, dozens, if not, over 100 issues that are going on at a given time that we try and keep on top of, because collectively they all end up having a big impact on the industry.
Which manufacturer would you say makes the best lead weights to put in a walleye?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I actually hadn't looked around to see whose those were. It certainly got a lot of attention. Whoever
Oh
it was
yeah,
probably doesn't want to admit it, but
yeah.
yeah, not the best market to be in these days,
So,
especially if you get
so
caught.
I'm sure you know more about that than I do, but my buddy used to run just a local Wednesday night bass fishing club tournament on a local lake here in the Dallas Fort Worth area. And even like 7, 8 years ago, the winner had to take a polygraph test because, you know, they weren't sticking weights in the fish, but they would catch them the day before and tie them up. And, everyone's trying to gain an unfair advantage. So they started using a polygraph. Did these guys not have to take a polygraph or they already passed it?
Yeah, I didn't look into it that much, but I am surprised they got away with it for as long as they did.
Yeah.
Either
It seems,
polygraph or, I mean, I don't know. That seems like something that shouldn't be all that hard to catch if you've got multiple fish of the same length being checked in and suddenly one of them or a couple of them are weighing significantly more. Again, I don't know how they got away with it for that
yeah.
long.
Well, I mean, I've caught walleye, but I wouldn't know like what a 3 pound versus a 5 pound walleye was. Like if you showed me a 3 pound bass and a 5 pound, I'd be like, that weighs more than that fish. Clearly, if the 3 pounder started weighing 5 pounds, it would take me one fish to be like,
Right.
so yeah, that is
Especially when
amazing.
you're checking them one after another. Yeah, I don't
Right.
know. That certainly, I would think egg on the face of the organizers too for, letting them
It's
get
like
away
they had
with
an inside job going on or something.
it. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I will say I got more, like, no one in my family or friends understands what I do, but I got more emails and texts about that story than anything else. I'm like, yeah, that's not my deal. I don't do
Mhm.
that stuff, but it is interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so I recently became aware of some pretty harsh restrictions that are trying to be implemented up and down the Atlantic coast, and it's regarding the protection of the North Atlantic right whale. So I did a little research on this whale, and it seems like there's maybe like 500 of them left in the wild.
I think it's 300 and some
Oh,
now. There were
300. Okay.
500 like a decade or so ago.
Mhm.
The stock's going downhill. They're not in good shape for sure.
And historically, they were commercially hunted. That's why their numbers initially were dropping. And just reading, they were a pretty easy target. They'd come to the surface, and then once they were shot, they would float to the surface. I don't know if all whales do that. I don't know, but apparently that they were an easy mark and pretty convenient. Oh, and they stayed close to the coastline, so didn't have to go too far offshore to find them.
Yeah, I heard recently that they're called the right whale because that's like when the whale hunters were out there, they'd say, all right, that's the right whale. Let's get that one.
Yeah,
That was the one
yeah.
they were going after.
Uh-huh. So they were dealt a harsh hand historically from a market hunting standpoint, things that we no longer do in North America, for all the right reasons. But today, it seems like they're trying to cripple every other aspect of fishing and recreation that occurs up and down the entire Atlantic coastline. So what have they proposed in order to try to protect these remaining whales?
Yeah. So again, I mean, there's not many left. Mention the numbers. There's 300 or so left, only 72, 74 breeding females left. Obviously, they're the most important ones because they're the ones that are producing calves to help sustain the population. But yeah, that's just not very many whales left.
Uh-huh.
There are existing regulations. So the two biggest sources of mortality from humans are because right whales are facing other challenges in terms of food supply, warming waters, all that stuff. But from a human standpoint, there are fishing gear entanglements from not recreational, but from like lobster and crab gear. And they've got
Uh-huh.
these deep set lines and buoys that their traps are on, and whales will get entangled in those. And then the other is collisions with vessels, generally larger vessels. So there are from a vessel speed restriction standpoint to try and minimize vessel strikes, there are speed zones off of most of the major ports along the Atlantic coast that are seasonal, starting in November, usually going until April or May, that just apply to vessels 65 feet and up. So not many sport fishing boats in that size class, generally larger commercial vessels. The thing is that there still continues to be strikes every now and then. So what's being proposed now is to substantially expand both the range of these areas. So going from, just off of, I don't know, about 6 or 8 ports off the East Coast to the entire coast from Massachusetts all the way down to about central Florida, for dozens of miles offshore. I think up to 100 miles offshore is the furthest out this goes. And for about half the year, from November until April or May, depending on which part of that zone you're in. And then where this starts to significantly affect the recreational fishing community is it reduces the size that this applies to from 65 feet all the way down to 35 feet and up. And you do start getting into tens of thousands of recreational boats in that class that would be affected by this. And the speed, the maximum speed you're allowed to go in this zone during that time period is 10 knots, which is about 11.5 miles an hour. So you can imagine trying to get, a few dozen miles offshore. It doesn't give a whole lot of time for fishing when you're only going 11.5 miles an hour.
When we go red snapper fishing off the Texas coast, we're like 60 miles out.
Yeah. So 6 hours out.
Imagine
fish
that
for
would be such a beating. It would even be, we don't spend the night out there, so it wouldn't even be worth it.
No. So that's the challenge. I mean, we've already heard from several boat manufacturers that have had orders canceled. Charter captains that are freaking out because who's going to want to pay to go on a 6-hour boat ride to fish for a couple minutes and then come back in.
Yeah. So it would be completely devastating. But from a conservation standpoint, we're both conservationists. We got to save these whales, right? I mean, that's the mentality. So, but what's the trade-off? And if you're negatively impacting the entire fishing industry on the entire Atlantic seaboard, well, I don't know that that's a good thing. It's not a good thing.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the we're struggling with partly sort of the optics here, because you're exactly right. We're conservationists. We want to protect these whales. It'd be one thing if, as a community, this was a widely recognized. We are clearly contributing to the problem here. There's such a frequent occurrence here that we're obviously impacting whales. We got to do something about it. If you look at the numbers, though, since 2008, there have been 5 strikes of right whales of vessels less than 65 feet. The smallest of which was 42 feet. So it starts to beg the question, why are we talking about 35 feet as the minimum? But anyway, it's an extremely rare occurrence. We've done some numbers, and at best, it's a less than 1 in a million odds of a vessel of this size class hitting a right whale. It's just extremely low occurrence. So it's that trade-off of we understand we want to help the whales, but the magnitude of what's being proposed here versus the risk of how rare this is, it just doesn't match up.
So 5 since 2008.
4 of which are in existing speed areas. So at a minimum, we wonder, why don't we just look at the existing speed zone?
Hell, why don't we just say no boats in those areas?
Yeah.
Nobody put a boat in the water in the Atlantic. We got to save the damn whales.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, that's sort of what we're looking at. Because I mean, the fear. So in Canada, they've done this type of speed restriction. Theirs was 42 feet and up, and there continue to be collisions. Whales continue to be plummeting. So yeah, it's sort of like, if this isn't working, it's not very well enforced. The strikes still continue to happen. What's next? The next step's going to be seriously at some point. All right, well, let's just stop going in the ocean. No more humans out there.
Yeah. I'm sorry, just 5 and what is that? 15 years almost.
Yeah.
Is negligible. And so there's another reason why their numbers are declining. And it isn't boats.
Yeah.
So I don't know scientifically, or if you guys have an idea of what's going on there.
Yeah, I mean, there's you mentioned whaling, the historic impacts of that. I mean, there's only 300 some of them left. From what I understand, it's not a particularly genetically diverse population. There's been a lot of inbreeding within right whale stock. Just genetically, the species isn't in a good place to self-sustain itself, just given the historical impacts it's had. So there's a fair amount of speculation that it's already a functionally extinct species, which is really sad and depressing to think about. But I think that the numbers we've heard from the National Marine Fisheries Services, their models say if there is 1 right whale mortality in a year caused by humans, then the stock can't recover. So sounds like we're setting up unrealistic expectations to recover the species if it's that threatened and in such a poor state. And again, not to say we shouldn't try, but is it worth shutting down the entire Atlantic coast economy to do that? I think a lot of people would would question whether that's the way to go.
Anybody that wouldn't like glue themselves to a tree would probably have the same mindset. I mean, at
Yeah,
some point, common sense has to rule. And I'm sorry about these whales. And you hate to say, well, yeah, because I am a conservationist, I don't want to see any species go extinct. But and I'm just going to say it, if a species goes extinct, but we don't shut down an entire coastal, I mean, the entire Atlantic seaboard, like we can't just shut it down for one species. I'm sorry. And that's
yeah.
it sounds terrible and harsh and like, okay, well, you're such a jerk, but that's reality. And
Well, especially
humans
when,
are first. Sorry, animals, but that's the way it is.
yeah, I mean, from our standpoint, especially when this is sort of presented like as an all or nothing thing, like either we shut down all boating in the Atlantic Ocean to save right whales, or we do nothing. And like in our minds, like there's got to be something else we can try here. Technology, can we try tagging these whales? There's already a fair number of them tagged. Can we put more resources into tagging, look at real-time monitoring of where they're moving, and when the whales are entering an area? Maybe that's when we start looking at some sort of regulations. But this sort of blanket approach of let's just shut it all down and hope for the best, just the level of impact it's going to have versus the benefit just seems way over the top. And I mean, we can dig into the analysis that the agency did to come up with this. I mean, we've submitted a ton of comments and had lawyers and researchers and others look into this. The analysis that they did to come to this conclusion is significantly flawed. The agency has way overestimated whale density, because this is all based off of like computer modeling and risk assessments and all that stuff. Way overestimated whale density. They've assumed that all boats 35 to 65 feet have a 10-meter draft, which, you got to find a pretty large boat in that class to even have a 2-meter draft. So that's all suggesting, we're much more likely to hit whales. Again, there's just some major flaws in the analysis they did that significantly overestimate the risks that these boats are causing anyway, which again, if you look at the real numbers, we're talking about 5 strikes since 2008. Clearly this isn't a significant risk here, but they've had such a flawed analysis that it's spitting out much greater risk than is actually the case. So again, this doesn't seem like the right approach. Let's figure out other options, work together. This was sort of sprung on our industry in the 11th hour without any consultation. Let's figure out other ways to save whales, recognizing that the odds are stacked against them. But, let's not go forward with this.
Well, we could just maybe stop sending so much money to Ukraine and like do a program to like tag the whales. And then I don't know if if the technology exists to where, so say we tagged all the whales with some of the Ukrainian money, and would the technology be there to where just the average commercial fisherman could see it on his graph? Like there's the whales. Let's, be aware that they're here. We'll slow down and then we'll speed back up once we're past the whales.
I'm confident the answer is yes. Again, if we collaborate with industry, you think of all the marine electronic manufacturers out there, boats of this class are going to have some sort of units, whether it's a AIS unit or otherwise, to be alerted when there are whales in the area. That's where, again, being able to collaborate and work together from an industry and regulator standpoint, you got to think that the amount of impact to the economy that this regulation would cause, it's one of those an ounce of prevention versus a pound of cure thing. If we put some money into technology, working together between boaters, industry, and the agency on something like that, an Amber Alert kind of system for right whales, that's got to be a more effective way to save them than what they're proposing here.
Yeah.
More effective and more, efficient from a fiscal standpoint.
Right. I was looking at just like the top 10 endangered whale species, and there's another one on the Pacific side called the North Pacific right whale that's endangered, which I didn't even know right whales were a thing until this came, across my desk essentially. So it seems like this, I'm sure it's a very close relative of the North Atlantic. It just seems like they're not doing very good in 2022, and there's got to be reason. What do these things eat?
I'm not a whale biologist. My understanding is a lot of it's, plankton, krill, which, you get into all the changes that are going on in the ocean, food web disruptions, all that stuff. Part of it is impacts to their food supply, shifting ranges of the species itself, as well as the rest of the ecosystem. So they don't seem to be adapting as well to all the changes that's going on.
There's another species in the Gulf called the rice whale, which you were telling me about. I didn't know that was a thing either. Apparently nobody did until recently.
Yeah, there's only like 50 of them left, and we just now discovered them. I think it's sort of a subspecies of, again, I'm not a whale biologist, but yes, just recently discovered this Rice's whale, which, yeah, there's only 50 or so of them estimated to be left. So there's already a petition to the National Marine Fisheries Service to do something similar to what they're proposing in the Atlantic for right whales, in terms of speed restrictions for all boats in the entire Gulf of Mexico, prohibitions on oil and gas development. Essentially, let's shut down the entire Gulf of Mexico because of this whale we just discovered.
I'm going to interrupt you because that is the most asinine thing I've ever heard. Well, it's equally as asinine as what they're trying to do on the Atlantic coast. But as a fisherman that's enjoyed many offshore trips in the Gulf of Mexico, those oil rigs are what supports our marine ecosystem, because every one of those is its own artificial reef. So yes, all these quote environmentalists, they hate big oil. They hate anything that, impacts potentially. They might not even like it just because they think it's an eyesore. Well, guess what? I think all of those wind turbines look like crap, but yet they're there, and I'm not bitching about it. So here we have something that actually creates habitat for, say, our red snapper fishery, which I think, if you ask anyone on the Texas coast, the reason why our fishery, our red snapper specifically, is so vibrant is because of all those oil platforms. And so let's stop doing the thing that gives the fish the habitat for the sake of saving these 50 newly discovered rice whales.
Yeah, I remember seeing videos of when because the federal government was forcing them to be decommissioning some of these oil rigs, using explosives. And I mean, it's just saddest, the amount of fish biomass that's living on those that ends up getting, decimated when they come down. I mean, yeah, it's a mecca of marine life that gets created. Of course, that's where the best fishing takes place too. So it certainly provided some significant marine ecosystem benefits to have all that structure out there.
And it's such a weird conundrum as like a conservationist saying, well, basically, sorry about you, whales, like the rest of the fishery off the Texas coast is more important than 50 whales. I'm sorry, that's the way it is. What's more important? What's pumping money into the economy? Oil, red snapper, or these 50 whales? And, at some point you just have to be a realist and say, yeah, this time in history might not work out for you. And it sucks to say that. And I think it's the thing that everyone struggles with, and it's kind of a bad look that you mentioned the optics of it, but we have to live in reality at the end of the day.
Yeah. Let's say, our positions, and maybe I'm just naive about this, is, let's, accept the reality of the dire situation that some of these species are in, but the response shouldn't be, and this is often what we see, it's just this reactionary, let's shut everything down and just hope for the best, we're in 2022, there's significant technology research. You mentioned earlier, there's a lot of money being thrown out at a lot of different causes. If these species are as important to society as some people make them out to be,
they're so important we didn't know they existed.
Yeah, they're so important we didn't know existed, and our solution is going to be, let's not figure out the right way to balance things out. Let's just shut everything down. Let's work together, collaborate. Industry can, help, especially if the alternative is shutting things down. Let's figure out how to avoid in real time using technology, research, etc. Ways to, at least try to coexist, as opposed to just this reactionary, again, let's shut everything down and hope for the best.
Even if we didn't tag them all, because that would be a huge undertaking, probably very expensive. And it seems like our government will spend money on anything else before they would undertake a worthwhile endeavor like this. But there's got to be a way where, if you see the whales, like a captain sees the whales, he could mark it on something and share that with everybody.
Yeah. On the very rare instance that a captain sees a whale. I mean, that's part of it is, you hear from all sorts of captains on the Atlantic coast. They're like, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've never seen a right whale in my life. And now you want me to fundamentally change the way my business operates off of 30 years of experience, a thing that's never happened to me before. So, yeah, it wouldn't be easy to find these 50 animals in the entire Gulf of Mexico, but talk about trade-offs. The trade-offs is shutting everything down. There's a will, there's a way.
Well, interesting conversation. It's one of those tough ones that I think when people really look at the facts, it's like, oh, yeah, that sucks for the whales. And I hate even saying it, like I mentioned, but I don't know. Like you said, there's got to be other ways to try to. We're not throwing in the towel. We're not giving up, but we are going to be accept what's might happen.
Yeah.
So, well, interesting conversation. I appreciate the time, Mike. If you want to give y'all's website and social media outlets, and I assume that you guys aren't a group that would say no to any kind of financial donation for your efforts.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I guess just one last thing on the right whale thing. So just from the timeline here. So this rule was proposed over the summer. There's been a public comment period that just closed yesterday, actually, on Halloween. That said, I don't know that that's going to be the end of it. I would imagine this is likely to end up in the courts from either the environmental community or from the boating and recreational fishing community. So anyway, point being that one's TBD on how it ends up getting resolved. And
we're working hard on this interview. I should have asked you that. So, and I also want to ask you, who's behind the proposal?
So there's been environmental groups petitioning the National Marine Fisheries Service on it, but the rule itself came from, Office of National Marine, the National Marine Fisheries Service Office of Protected Resources. And, in meeting with folks over there, there's some true believers over there that want to do everything they can to save the whales. And that's sort of what we're up against here. So it is entirely from the federal government, although again, there are a lot of environmental groups pushing this from the outside too.
Yeah, it's not too different than you compare it to the grizzly bear who's recovered in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Biologists are saying we need a hunting season. Like right now is the time where people are in the woods elk and mule deer hunting, and you keep seeing these attacks, increased human grizzly conflict. So let's just say that the grizzly bear is more important than human life. Well, I like grizzlies as much as anybody, but I'm going to tell you that no, humans are the real apex predator. That's why we have the ability to hunt grizzlies and have a season and manage their population so that we have a handle on it and that they don't decline, but also they can coexist with us peacefully.